Helena Oakes had perfected the art of standing in plain sight while remaining invisible. For 10 years she had worked in the administrative offices of the Everbane Court, the sprawling underground complex beneath the financial district where the vampire aristocracy conducted their affairs. 10 years of filing documents, managing correspondence, organizing blood shipments from the donor facilities, and watching Gorian Everbane move through the marble corridors like a storm wrapped in silk. He was the Vampire King of the Eastern Territories, though most humans who knew of his kind simply called him the Lord of Night. His hair fell white as bone down to his shoulders, his skin held the pallor of moonlight on snow, and his eyes carried the crimson of old wine held up to lamplight. He wore his immortality the way other men wore expensive suits, with an ease that suggested he had forgotten what it meant to be anything else. Helena had been 23 when she first arrived for her interview, fresh from university with a degree in ancient languages and a desperate need for employment that paid enough to cover her mother's medical bills. The human resources director, a sharp-eyed vampire named Isolde, had looked her over with obvious skepticism. "You understand that you will be working directly with our kind," Isolde had said, her accent carrying the weight of centuries spent in courts Helena could only imagine. Many humans find the proximity unsettling. Helena had kept her hands steady on her lap. "I understand. You will see things that the outside world does not believe exist. You will be required to sign binding documents, both legal and magical, that will prevent you from speaking of what you witness here. Your life will become divided between what you know and what you can say. It is a loneliness that many cannot bear. I can bear it." Isolde had studied her for a long moment, then slid the contract across the desk. "We shall see." The magical binding had felt like cold water sliding down her throat, settling somewhere behind her sternum where it remained even now, a constant reminder of the bargain she had made. In exchange for her silence and service, she received a salary 3 times what any other entry-level position would have offered, full medical coverage for her family, and access to a world that most humans never dreamed existed. She had not expected to fall in love. It happened slowly, which somehow made it worse. If it had been sudden, a lightning strike of attraction, she might have been able to dismiss it as foolishness. Instead, it built like sediment, layer upon careful layer, until she looked up one day and realized that the weight of it might crush her. She loved the way he listened when his advisors spoke, his attention absolute and unwavering. She loved that he remembered the names of every human employee, that he had once stopped a council meeting to ask after her mother's health because he had overheard her on the phone with the hospital. She loved the rare moments when something genuinely amused him and his careful control would slip just enough to let a real smile show, the kind that made him look almost human, almost reachable. She loved him, and she had built her entire life around the certainty that he would never know. It was not difficult to hide. He was a king, ancient and powerful, and she was a human administrator who processed his paperwork. They existed in different worlds that happened to share the same physical space. She made herself useful, efficient, unremarkable. She wore neutral colors, kept her dark hair pulled back in simple styles, and cultivated the kind of professional demeanor that deflected attention rather than attracting it. The other human employees came and went over the years. Some left because they could not adjust to the strangeness of working among vampires. Others left because they adjusted too well, because they fell into the dangerous territory of infatuation and had to be transferred away before they caused problems. Helena watched them go and congratulated herself on her own superior control. She could love him silently. She could carry it like a secret stone in her pocket, something to turn over in private moments, and no one would ever need to know. Then, on a Thursday evening in late October, Gorian Everbane announced that he was seeking a queen. The declaration came during the monthly assembly, when all court members and senior staff gathered in the Great Hall. Helena stood in her usual spot along the back wall, her tablet ready to take notes, her expression carefully neutral. The hall was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, all soaring arches and chandeliers that had been converted from candlelight to electric bulbs that mimicked the warm flicker of flame. The vampire nobles filled the space like a collection of living sculptures, pale and beautiful and utterly still. Gorian stood at the front on the raised dais, his presence commanding attention without effort. He wore black as he always did, tailored to perfection, and his white hair caught the light like a crown. "The time has come," he said, his voice carrying easily through the space without need for amplification, "for me to take a queen." The stillness in the room somehow deepened. Helena's fingers froze over her tablet. "I have ruled alone for 3 centuries, Gorian continued. I have built these territories into a place of stability and prosperity. We have peace with the human world, trade agreements with the Western courts, and strength enough that no one dares challenge our borders. But a kingdom is not merely about power. It is about legacy, about the future. It is time I secured that future with a partner worthy of standing beside me. One of the elder council members, a vampire named Thaddeus with silver rings on every finger, stepped forward. "My lord, this is welcome news. Have you chosen a bride?" "Not yet." Gorian's gaze swept across the assembly. "I will consider candidates over the coming months. Those who believe themselves suitable may present their names to the council. I seek someone with intelligence, strength, and the capacity to understand the complexities of rule. Beauty alone will not suffice. I need a queen, not an ornament." The room erupted into barely contained murmurs. Helena felt her heart doing something painful and irregular in her chest. She forced herself to keep typing notes, to record the announcement as though it were merely another piece of court business. Of course he would marry. Of course he would choose someone. He was a king. This was what kings did. The fact that she had never let herself think about it did not make it any less inevitable. She made it through the rest of the assembly, through the detailed discussions of trade routes and territory disputes and blood supply logistics. She made it back to her small office on the third sub-level, where she shared space with two other administrators who had already left for the evening. She sat down at her desk, called up a spreadsheet that needed updating, and stared at it until the numbers blurred into meaningless shapes. 10 years. She had loved him for 10 years, and in all that time she had never let herself imagine an ending to the story. She had simply existed in the eternal present of seeing him, being near him, carrying her secret like a talisman against loneliness. Now he was going to marry someone else, and she would have to watch it happen. The door opened behind her. She did not turn, assuming it was one of her co-workers returning for a forgotten item. "Helena." Her entire body went rigid. She knew his voice the way she knew her own heartbeat, intimately and without question. She turned slowly in her chair. Gorian Everbane stood in her office doorway, filling the small space with his presence. This close, she could see the exact shade of his eyes, the way the red darkened near the pupil. He looked at her with an expression she could not decipher. "My lord." She started to stand, but he gestured for her to remain seated. "I need you to coordinate the logistics for the selection process," he said. "There will be formal presentations, interviews, background investigations. It will require significant organization. Isolde suggested you would be best suited for the task." Of course she did. Helena was good at her job. She was good at everything she did here, because competence was the armor she wore to survive. "I would be honored," she said, and was proud that her voice came out steady. "I know this will be additional work on top of your existing responsibilities. You will be compensated accordingly." He paused, his head tilting slightly as he studied her. "You seem tired. Are you well?" The concern in his voice was going to kill her. She could survive his indifference, but his kindness was a blade that slipped between her ribs every time. "I'm well, my lord, thank you." He looked at her a moment longer, and she had the strangest sensation that he was waiting for her to say something else. Then he nodded and turned to leave. "Gorian." His name left her mouth before she could stop it. He froze, his back to her. She never used his name. None of the human staff did. It was always "my lord" or "your majesty" in formal settings. Yes, she should have apologized for the familiarity, should have made some excuse. Instead, she heard herself say, "I hope you find what you're looking for." He turned back to face her, and there was something in his expression now. Something that might have been surprise or confusion, or something else entirely. "Thank you, Helena." Then he was gone, and she was alone with the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. The next 2 months were an exercise in exquisite torture. Helena organized everything with her usual efficiency. She coordinated with the council to establish criteria for candidates. She processed applications from vampire noblewomen across every territory, each one more beautiful and accomplished than the last. She scheduled interviews and formal dinners and elaborate presentations where these women could display their suitability. She watched Gorian move through it all with polite interest but no real enthusiasm. He was courteous to everyone, attentive, fair in his assessments. He showed no obvious preference, which somehow made it worse. If he had clearly favored someone, at least Helena would have known where to direct her grief. The candidates ranged from warriors to scholars to diplomats. There was Vivienne, who had commanded armies in the old country and spoke 6 languages. There was Morgana, who had advised 3 kings before Gorian and could recite legal precedent from memory. There was Seraphine, who moved like water and played the violin with such skill that even the stone walls seemed to weep. They were all worthy. They were all perfect. Helena hated every single one of them with a viciousness that ashamed her. She kept her feelings buried, locked down so tightly that she barely let herself acknowledge them even in private. She did her job. She smiled politely when candidates spoke to her, asking directions or requesting schedule changes. She compiled reports on each woman, detailing their qualifications and background. She did not let herself break. 3 weeks into the process, she was working late in the court library, pulling records for a candidate's Fähigkeitsverification when Gorian found her again. The library was one of her favorite places in the complex, a vast circular room lined floor to ceiling with books and scrolls, some of them older than most human civilizations. It smelled of leather and paper and the particular mustiness of preserved age. At this hour it was empty except for her. "You spend a great deal of time here," Gorian said from behind her. She did not jump. She had learned over the years that vampires moved in silence, and Gorian especially so. She finished sliding the volume she had been examining back into its place before turning. "The older records aren't digitized, my lord. It requires manual research, I'm aware." He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "I meant that I often see you here during your personal time as well. Late evenings, weekends," he noticed. Of course he noticed. She should have been more careful. "I like books," she said simply. "What do you read?" The question caught her off guard. In 10 years he had never asked her anything personal. Their interactions had always been professional, bounded by the clear lines of their positions. "History mostly," she said. "Ancient civilizations, mythology, languages. That's why Isolde hired you." He pulled a book from a nearby shelf, seemingly at random, examined the spine, slid it back. "Your degree was in comparative linguistics," he remembered. "From her file, presumably from her interview a decade ago." "Yes, my Lord Gorian," he said quietly. "When we are alone, you may use my name." "You did so once before." Her throat felt tight. "That was inappropriate, was it?" He turned to look at her directly. "You have worked for this court longer than most of the noble families have held their current titles. You have proven yourself trustworthy and competent beyond question. I do not think we need to stand on such ceremony in private." This was dangerous. This was stepping off a cliff, but she found herself nodding. "As you wish, tell me, Helena." He leaned against one of the reading tables, his posture more relaxed than she had ever seen it. "What do you think of the candidates?" Every self-protective instinct she possessed screamed at her to lie, to deflect, to give him the careful political answer he probably expected. Instead, she said, "They're all qualified. That's not what I asked." She met his eyes, those impossibly red eyes that had haunted her dreams for years. "What do you want me to say?" The truth is that I'm your administrator, not your advisor. My opinion on who should be queen is irrelevant. Humor me." She should have refused, should have made an excuse and left. Instead, she heard herself saying, "They're all playing a part, being what they think you want them to be. I can't tell who any of them really are underneath." Gorian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Neither can I." The admission shocked her. She had assumed he could see through them easily, that his centuries of experience would make such deceptions transparent. "You must have some sense of it," she said carefully. "You've ruled long enough to recognize dishonesty. I can recognize lies. That's different from recognizing truth." He pushed away from the table, paced a few steps, turned back. "They are all being truthful when they express interest in the position. They are all being truthful when they claim they could fulfill the duties required, but none of them have given me a moment of genuine connection. Every conversation feels like a negotiation. Isn't it?" "I suppose it is." He sounded tired suddenly, and she realized with a start that this was weighing on him. "But I had hoped for something more." The words hung in the air between them. Helena knew she should stay silent, should not push this conversation any further into dangerous territory. But he had asked for truth, and some reckless part of her was tired of being careful. "What did you hope for?" He looked at her, and his expression was so unguarded that it hurt to see. "Someone who looks at me and sees more than a crown and a title. Someone who knows what I am and stands beside me anyway, not because of what I can offer, but because of who I am beneath all of it." "That person exists," Helena said quietly. "You think so?" She thought of 10 years spent learning the subtle tells of his moods, the way his voice shifted when he was frustrated versus when he was genuinely angry. She thought of watching him make decisions that prioritized his people's welfare over his own convenience, of seeing him stop to help a young vampire learn to control their bloodlust, even though he had a council meeting to attend. She thought of every small moment that had built her love into something immovable and permanent. "I know so." He studied her face as though trying to read something written there. "You've never married. Never pursued anyone, to my knowledge." Her heart stopped, started again. "No." "May I ask why?" "Because I've been in love with you for a decade and no one else has ever come close. Because I built my entire life around stolen glimpses and brief conversations and the torture of proximity without possession. Because I'm a fool. I've been focused on my career," she said. "That's a deflection, not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving." They stood there in the lamplight, surrounded by the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge, and Helena felt the careful walls she had built beginning to crack. "I should finish this research," she said, gesturing vaguely at the shelves. "It's nearly midnight. Go home, Helena. The records will still be here tomorrow." "I don't mind." "I do." His voice was gentle but firm. "You've been working late every evening since this process began. You need rest." She wanted to argue, but the truth was she was exhausted, tired of maintaining her composure, tired of smiling through conversations about wedding arrangements and coronation plans. All right. She gathered her things, very aware of him watching her. When she reached the library door, his voice stopped her. Helena. She turned. Thank you, he said, for your honesty. She nodded and fled before she could do something catastrophically stupid. The breaking point came on a cold December evening when Gorian invited the top 3 candidates to a private dinner. Helena had arranged everything from the menu to the seating, and she was expected to attend in her administrative capacity to handle any needs that arose. The dinner was held in one of the smaller formal dining rooms, a space that managed to be both intimate and grand, with a table that could seat 12 comfortably and walls covered in dark tapestries depicting old-world hunting scenes. The 3 candidates were Vivienne, Morgana, and Seraphine, and they arrived dressed in gowns that probably cost more than Helena's annual salary. Helena wore her standard work attire, a simple black dress and low heels, and positioned herself near the door where she could observe but not intrude. She had become very good at being furniture. The dinner progressed with painful civility. Each candidate showcased her best qualities. Vivienne told strategic war stories that demonstrated her tactical mind. Morgana engaged Gorian in a debate about historical precedent in vampire law that would have been fascinating under other circumstances. Seraphine spoke about art and music with genuine passion. Gorian was attentive and engaged, playing the role of interested suitor with convincing skill. He laughed at witty remarks, asked thoughtful questions, and gave each woman his full focus when she spoke. Helena stood by the door and felt her heart crack a little further with each passing moment. She could see now what he meant about not finding genuine connection. Every interaction was polished, rehearsed. The women were not being false exactly, but they were being strategic, carefully managing their presentations. This was an interview disguised as a dinner party, and everyone knew it. Halfway through the main course, Seraphine turned her attention to Helena. "You've been with the court for some time, haven't you?" Helena blinked, surprised to be addressed. 10 years, yes, that's quite a tenure. You must have seen many changes." "Some," Helena said carefully, aware that all eyes had turned to her. "Lord Gorian speaks highly of your work," Vivienne added. "He says you are indispensable." She could feel Gorian's gaze on her. "I simply do my job." Modesty, Morgana said, her smile sharp. "How human." There was something in the way she said human that made it sound like an insult. Helena kept her expression neutral, but something must have shown because Gorian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Humanity is not a weakness, Morgana. I would think someone of your education would understand that." Morgana's smile froze. "Of course, my lord. I meant no offense. Didn't you?" He set down his wineglass with deliberate care. "Helena has served this court with dedication and skill that most vampires could not match. She manages complexities that would overwhelm beings twice her age with a fraction of her lifespan to gain experience. If that is what humanity looks like, then it is something to be respected." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Helena felt her face heating, mortification and something else warring in her chest. He was defending her. In front of the women he was considering marrying, he was defending her. "Thank you, my lord," she said quietly. His eyes met hers across the room. "It is simply truth." The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The candidates were more subdued now, uncertain. Gorian seemed distracted, his attention wandering. When the meal finally ended and the women departed, Helena began coordinating with the kitchen staff to clear the room. She was halfway through discussing storage of the leftover wine when she realized Gorian had not left with his guests. He stood by the window, looking out at the underground view, which was not a view at all, but rather a spelled illusion that showed the night sky above the city. "You don't need to do that," he said without turning. "The staff can handle it. It's my responsibility to ensure everything is properly managed." "Helena." He turned to face her. "Stop." She stopped. "Do you know what the hardest part of tonight was?" he asked. She shook her head. "It was watching 3 women who are supposed to be trying to win my favor spend the evening performing for me, and then realizing that the only person in the room who simply existed, who was genuine, was the one standing by the door taking notes." Her throat closed. "My Lord Gorian," he corrected, "and I need you to tell me something." "What? Why do you stay?" The question caught her completely off guard. "I don't understand. You could work anywhere. With your skills and experience, you could name your price at any corporation in the city. You could work in the human world where you wouldn't have to hide what you know, where you wouldn't be bound by magical contracts and blood oaths. Why do you stay here? Because of you. Because I have built my entire adult life around being near you. Because I am pathetic and hopeless and completely, irretrievably in love with you." "The work is interesting," she said. "That's a lie. It's not the whole truth then." He moved closer and she fought the urge to step back. "I have watched you for years, Helena. I know you think you are invisible, but I see you. I see how you care about the work we do here, how you stay late to ensure everything is perfect, how you remember details that no one else thinks matter. I see your intelligence, your dedication, and I see something else that you try very hard to hide. Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. Vampires had exceptional senses. He probably could. I don't know what you mean, don't you? They were too close now. Close enough that she could see the exact texture of his skin, the way his white hair moved with each slight shift of his head. Close enough that she could smell him, something cold and clean like winter air. Tell me to stop, he said quietly, and I will never mention this again. We will go back to being lord and administrator, and I will marry one of those women who want my crown. Tell me to stop, Helena. She could not find words, could not find breath. But if you don't tell me to stop, he continued, his voice low and careful, then I need you to tell me the truth. Why do you stay? The walls finally crumbled. The careful control she had maintained for 10 years shattered like glass, and she could not hold back the truth anymore. Because I love you, she whispered. I have loved you since I was 23 years old and too stupid to know better. I have loved you through every day of the last 10 years, and I will love you through however many years I have left. I stay because leaving would be worse than staying. I stay because seeing you every day and never being able to have you is still better than not seeing you at all. That's why I stay. The silence that followed her confession was absolute. Gorian stared at her with an expression she could not begin to interpret. She waited for him to step back, to say something kind and dismissive, to gently put her back in her place. Instead, he raised one pale hand and cupped her face with a gentleness that destroyed her. 10 years, he said, and his voice was rough with something that might have been pain. You have loved me for 10 years and never said anything. What was I supposed to say? You're a vampire king and I'm a human administrator. There is no universe in which that story ends well. Do you know why I decided to search for a queen? She shook her head slightly, afraid to dislodge his hand. Because I was tired of being alone. Because I have spent 3 centuries building a kingdom and I realized I had no one to share it with who truly understood me. Because I was tired of being surrounded by people who saw only what I could give them and never who I actually am. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. And because there was one person who looked at me like I was more than my crown, and I did not think she could ever be mine. Helena's mind reeled. What? You think you were hiding your feelings? Helena, you were the only thing I looked forward to in my days. Every time I found an excuse to speak with you, every time you challenged me or told me the truth instead of what you thought I wanted to hear, every time you smiled at something I said. I have been half in love with you for years and I convinced myself it was impossible. You are human, you are mortal, and you worked for me, which made any relationship inappropriate at best and exploitative at worst. So you decided to marry someone else? I decided to do what I thought was right, to choose someone appropriate, someone equal in status and immortality, to stop torturing myself by being near you and pretending I did not want more. He smiled, but it was sad. It appears I am not very good at choosing duty over desire. You never said anything, neither did you. They stood there, his hand still cradling her face. The truth finally spoken between them. Helena felt as though the world had tilted on its axis and she was not sure which direction was up anymore. This is impossible, she said. Even if we both feel the same way, it doesn't solve anything. I'm still human. I'm still mortal. I will age and die and you will continue on as you always have. This doesn't have a happy ending. Are you sure? How could I not be? There are ways, Gorian said carefully, for a human to become what we are. The process is not easy and it is not without risk, but it is possible. She stared at him. You're talking about turning me. I'm talking about giving you a choice. His hand dropped away from her face and she immediately missed the contact. I will not command it. I will not pressure you. But if you wanted it, if you wanted to stay with me not for 10 years but for centuries, it could be done. The enormity of what he was offering crashed over her. To become a vampire. To give up her humanity, her mortality, everything she had been. To gain immortality, yes, but also to become something else, something other. To be with him. To have not just stolen moments and secret longing but an actual future. I need time to think, she said. Of course. He stepped back, giving her space. Take all the time you need. But Helena, whatever you decide, I need you to know something. What? I am done pretending. I am done with this charade of finding a queen among women I do not love. I am canceling the selection process. If you choose not to be with me, I will respect that. But I will not marry someone else simply because it is appropriate. I have lived too long to waste any more time on should and must when I have finally found someone who makes me feel like I could be more than my crown. Before she could respond, before she could process what he had just said, he was gone, moving with that impossible vampire speed that left her alone in the dining room with her thoughts in chaos. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the walls, and tried to think through what he had offered her rationally. To become a vampire would mean losing the sun. It would mean drinking blood to survive, relying on the donor program, or as many vampires did, keeping a small stable of willing humans who provided for them. It would mean watching everyone she knew age and die while she remained frozen. Her mother was already elderly, her health fragile. If Helena became a vampire, she would lose the ability to visit during the day, to help with doctor's appointments and medication management. But her mother would not live forever. In the harsh calculus of mortality, she had perhaps 5 years left, 10 if they were lucky. And then what? Would Helena return to her safe, careful life of hidden longing? Would she watch Gorian eventually choose someone else out of political necessity? Could she live with herself if she turned down the chance for something real out of fear? She thought about what he had said, that he had loved her for years, that he was tired of being alone, that he saw her as more than her position or her mortality. She thought about 10 years of loving him from a distance, of building her entire world around moments of proximity that would never be enough. She thought about the possibility of forever. By dawn, she had made her decision. She waited until evening to return to the court. She knew Gorian would be in council meetings most of the day, so she used the time to prepare. She wrote letters to her mother, to the few friends she had maintained, explaining as much as the magical binding would allow. She updated her will. She arranged for her apartment lease to be transferred. She was putting her affairs in order, because she knew that once she did this, there would be no going back. At sunset, she went to his private chambers for the first time in 10 years of working for him. She had been here in a professional capacity occasionally, delivering urgent messages that could not wait, but she had never ventured past the receiving room. She knocked. A moment later, the door opened and Gorian stood there in more casual clothes than she was used to seeing him wear. Dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked surprised to see her. "Helena, I've made my decision." He went very still. "And, ask me properly." His expression shifted, something fierce and hopeful moving across his features. He took her hand, his skin cool against hers, and looked at her with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. "Helena Oakes, will you stay with me? Will you let me love you the way I have wanted to for years? Will you become my partner, my queen, my equal in all things? Will you let me give you immortality so that I never have to lose you?" Her eyes burned. Yes, the kiss was inevitable, a collision of lips and breath and desperate relief. He pulled her into his chambers and against his body, and she wrapped her arms around him and kissed him back with 10 years of restrained longing finally breaking free. He was cool and strong and solid, and he held her like she was precious, like she was something he had been afraid to break. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard despite only one of them needing air, he rested his forehead against hers. "There are things you need to know," he said, "about the process, about what it will feel like, about the risks. Tell me." They spent the next hour talking logistics. He explained that the transformation required her to drink his blood while she was near death, that he would have to drain her to the edge of mortality first, that the process was agonizing, that her body would tear itself apart and rebuild, that some humans did not survive the transition, that if she did survive, she would wake changed, hungrier, stronger other. "I won't force this," he said for the dozenth time. "If you have doubts, we can wait. We can try to find another way." "There is no other way," Helena said. "Either I do this and we have a chance at forever, or I don't and I watch myself age while you stay the same. I know which one I choose." "When?" "Soon, but not tonight." She touched his face, marveling at the fact that she could now. "Tonight I just want to be with you. To have one evening where I'm still human and you're finally mine." He kissed her again, softer this time. "I have always been yours. I just didn't know if I could have you." They did not sleep together that night, not in the full sense. Gorian was too aware of the imbalance between them, too concerned about consent and power dynamics. But they lay together in his bed and talked until dawn threatened, sharing stories and secrets, and all the small details they had never been allowed to exchange. She learned that he had been born in the 14th century, the son of a minor noble who had lost everything in a war. That he had been turned at 28 by a vampire who saw potential in him. That he had clawed his way up through the ranks of vampire society through intelligence and strategy rather than brute force. That he hated most court politics but tolerated them because the alternative was chaos. That he loved classical music and modern mysteries and had a secret fondness for terrible human action movies. He learned that she had grown up poor, that her father had left when she was young, that she had put herself through university on scholarships and stubbornness, that she spoke 4 languages fluently and could read 3 dead ones. That she had taken this job initially just for the money, but had stayed because she believed in what the court was trying to build. That she was terrified of deep water and loved thunderstorms and had always wanted to travel but never had the time. By the time the sun rose, She felt like she knew him more completely than she had ever known anyone, and more importantly, she felt known. "I need to go," she said reluctantly as the windows began to brighten with artificial dawn. The underground complex did not get natural sunlight, but the spelled windows simulated the cycle to help the human employees maintain normal rhythms. "Stay," he said. "Call in sick," she laughed. "I've never called in sick in 10 years. Then you're overdue." She kissed him instead of answering and reluctantly extracted herself from his bed. "I need to handle some final arrangements for after." His expression sobered. "Your mother? I need to see her. Spend time with her while I still can. Once I'm turned, the daytime visits will be impossible. I wish I could meet her. She doesn't know about vampires, about any of this, but she knows you love me," Helena blinked. "I never told her. A mother knows." He sat up, the sheets pooling at his waist. "You don't speak of her often, but when you do, there's care in your voice. She raised someone remarkable. I would have liked to thank her for that." Her eyes burned again. How was it that he could see so clearly to the heart of things? "After," she promised. "When I'm turned and stable, we'll find a way. Evening visits maybe. Video calls. Whatever you need." She left before she could second-guess herself, before the reality of what she was about to do could paralyze her with fear. The next 3 weeks were a strange suspended period. Helena worked her notice, training her replacement and organizing her files with typical thoroughness. She spent every available moment with her mother, explaining that she was being transferred to a new position that would require different hours and make regular visits more difficult. Her mother, sharp despite her illness, looked at her knowingly. "You've found someone. How did you know? You're glowing. I haven't seen you this happy since you were a child." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Don't sacrifice your happiness for me, Helena. I'm dying. That's simply a fact. But you're young, and you have your whole life ahead of you. Live it." If only she knew how much life Helena was about to have. In the evenings, she was with Gorian. He had made the formal announcement to the court that the Queen's selection was cancelled, that he had found his choice. The reaction was mixed, shock and confusion, and some anger from the families who had put forward candidates. When he announced that his choice was Helena, that he intended to turn and make her his queen, the shock intensified. "She's human," one council member protested. "Not for much longer," Gorian replied calmly. "She has no noble blood, no family connections, no power base. She has intelligence, integrity, and my love. That is sufficient." There were arguments, debates, even a few threats of withdrawal from the council. Gorian faced them all with the same unshakable certainty. He had made his choice, and he would not be moved. Helena watched him defend her to the most powerful vampires in the territory, and fell even more in love with him. Finally, the night came. Helena had said her goodbyes to everyone who mattered, had put all her human affairs in order. She stood in Gorian's private chambers, wearing a simple white dress, and felt surprisingly calm. "Are you certain?" he asked for what must have been the 100th time. "I'm certain. It will hurt. I know. You may hate me for it before it's over. I could never hate you." He pulled her close, pressed his face into her hair. "I am terrified of losing you. If something goes wrong, if you don't survive, I will never forgive myself. Then make sure I survive." She pulled back to look at him. "I trust you, Gorian. I have always trusted you. Do this for me. Give me forever." The actual process was clinical in its efficiency despite the intimacy of it. Gorian laid her on his bed and sat beside her, holding her hand. "I'm going to drain you first," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his body. "I'll stop before you die, but you'll be close. Then you'll drink from me. You'll need to drink deeply to take enough of my blood that it can begin the transformation. It won't be pleasant. I understand." He bent to her throat, his lips brushing her pulse point. She felt his fangs, sharp and precise, pierce her skin. The pain was immediate and significant, but it was followed almost instantly by something else, a strange lassitude that spread through her veins. Vampire venom, she realized dimly. It was numbing her, making the feeding more bearable. She felt her blood leave her body, felt herself growing weaker by the second. Her vision blurred, her thoughts scattering. She was dying. She was actually dying. And some primal part of her brain was screaming in protest even as she held still and let it happen. Just when she thought she might slip away entirely, he stopped. His wrist appeared before her face, already open, blood welling dark and viscous. "Drink," he commanded, and she obeyed. His blood tasted like metal and cold earth and something indefinable, something that registered to her dying brain as power. She drank, and it was like swallowing lightning. It burned down her throat, hit her stomach, and then exploded outward through every nerve ending in her body. The pain was extraordinary. It felt like her cells were being ripped apart and reassembled, like her bones were breaking and reforming. She would have screamed, but she couldn't find air for it. Somewhere distant she heard Gorian's voice, calm and steady, telling her to breathe, to hold on, that it would be over soon. It did not feel like it would ever be over. It felt like dying slowly over the course of hours, every moment stretched into infinity. She lost time, lost awareness of anything except the agony remaking her from the inside out. Then, like a switch being thrown, it stopped. Helena opened eyes she hadn't realized she'd closed and found herself staring at the ceiling of Gorian's chamber. Every detail was impossibly sharp, from the carved molding to the tiny crack near the corner. She could hear things she'd never noticed before, the hum of electricity in the walls, the movement of air through the ventilation system, the sound of voices from rooms away. And she could smell blood, so much blood. The scent of it was overwhelming, intoxicating, making her throat burn with sudden hunger. She sat up, the movement faster than she'd intended, and found Gorian watching her from across the room. He was giving her space, she realized. Giving her room to adjust, to cope with the overwhelming input of her new senses. "How do you feel?" he asked carefully. "Everything is so loud," she said, and her own voice sounded different, clearer. "And I can smell colors." "Can you smell colors? This is insane." Despite the tension in his posture, he smiled. "You'll adjust. The sensory overload fades with practice. I'm so hungry." The words came out almost as a growl, and she was horrified by the sound of her own need. "I know." He gestured to the side table where a crystal decanter sat beside 2 glasses. "I have blood for you, fresh from the donor center. You need to feed to complete the transformation." She moved without meaning to, suddenly standing beside the table with no memory of crossing the distance. The speed was disorienting. She poured with shaking hands and drank, and the blood was perfect, warm and rich and satisfying in a way that nothing had ever been before. She finished 1 glass, then another. The hunger receded to a manageable background need, and her thoughts cleared. "I survived," she said, looking at Gorian with wonder. "You survived." He moved closer now, cautious. "How do you feel about me?" Sometimes new vampires hate their sires at first. The trauma of the turning can create resentment. Helena laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "I don't hate you, I love you. I chose this. How could I resent you for giving me what I asked for?" The relief in his expression was palpable. He closed the remaining distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I was so afraid," he murmured against her hair. "So afraid I would lose you." "You didn't. I'm here. I'm going to be here for a very long time." They stood like that for several minutes, just holding each other. Then Helena pulled back, a thought occurring to her. "What happens now? Now you learn to be what you are. I'll teach you to control your strength, your speed, your hunger. You'll need to feed regularly at first, several times a day, until your body stabilizes. You'll learn to navigate vampire politics, to hold your own among the nobility who will test you." He cupped her face, his touch gentle. "And we will be together, properly. No more hiding, no more pretending. You will be my queen, my partner, if you still want that." "I want it," she said. "I want everything." The kiss was different now that she was strong enough to match him, fast enough to keep up. It was fierce and claiming, and when he laid her back on the bed this time, there was no hesitation about consent or power imbalances. They were equals now, vampire and vampire, king and future queen. They made love as the false dawn turned to day outside, and Helena discovered that forever was going to be even better than she had imagined. The next months were a blur of adjustment and education. Helena learned to control her new strength after accidentally crushing 3 glasses and putting her hand through a wall. She learned to move with vampire speed without colliding with furniture. She learned the complex etiquette of vampire society, the old rules and formal courtesies that governed interactions. She learned to hunt, though Gorian assured her she would never need to rely on that skill given their access to the donor program. But it was important to know how, he explained, important to understand all aspects of what she had become. She learned politics, sitting in on council meetings and territorial negotiations. Some of the nobles who had opposed her turning came around when they saw her intelligence and quick grasp of complex issues. Others remained hostile, seeing her as an upstart human who had manipulated their king. Gorian dealt with the latter swiftly and without mercy. When one lord made a particularly cutting remark about Helena's lack of breeding, Gorian had him removed from the council and exiled from the territory. "You can't exile everyone who insults me," Helena protested afterward. "Watch me," Gorian replied calmly. "It will make them resent me more. It will teach them that you are mine, and I do not tolerate disrespect toward what is mine." He pulled her close. "You are my queen, Helena. They need to understand what that means." The coronation was held 3 months after her turning, once she had gained enough control to manage the formal ceremony without incident. It was an elaborate affair, attended by vampire nobility from across the continent, and even a few representatives from the old European courts. Helena wore a gown of deep burgundy that had been made specifically for her, with intricate silver embroidery that caught the light. Her dark hair, now holding subtle red highlights that had appeared after her transformation, was arranged in an elaborate style with a crown of silver and garnets. She walked down the aisle of the great hall alone, her head high, meeting the gazes of everyone present without flinching. She knew they were judging her, evaluating her, looking for any sign of weakness. She gave them none. Gorian waited for her on the dais, magnificent in black with silver accents, his white hair a stark contrast to the darkness. When she reached him, he took her hand and faced the assembly. Helena Oakes was human, he said, his voice carrying through the space. She served this court with honor and dedication for a decade before I finally had the courage to claim her. She gave up her mortality for me, for us, for the future we will build together. She has proven herself worthy in every way that matters. Today I name her Queen of the Eastern Territories, my equal in all things, my partner in rule and in life. Let any who doubt her come forward now and state their challenge. The silence was heavy. No one moved. Gorian smiled, sharp and satisfied. He turned to Helena and placed a second crown on her head, matching his own. "All hail Queen Helena," he said. "All hail Queen Helena," the assembly repeated, some with genuine respect and others through clearly gritted teeth. Helena didn't care. She had Gorian. She had forever, and she had earned her place here through her own merit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The celebration afterward was extravagant, flowing blood and wine and music that had been old when most humans were still learning to write. Helena danced with Gorian, moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and deflecting subtle challenges with the diplomatic skills she had honed over years of managing difficult personalities. Late in the evening, she found herself on one of the balconies that overlooked the underground complex. The spelled view showed a city skyline at night, stars scattered across an artificial sky. It wasn't real, but it was beautiful. Gorian joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. "Tired?" he asked. "A little. Happy, though." "Good." He kissed her temple. "You were magnificent today. I'm still getting used to all of it. The politics, the titles, the idea that I'm going to be doing this for centuries. Any regrets?" She turned in his arms to face him fully. "Not a single one. I meant what I said 10 years ago, even if I didn't say it out loud. I love you, Gorian. I have always loved you. Getting to spend forever with you isn't a sacrifice. It's the greatest gift I could have received." His expression softened into something almost vulnerable. "I spent 300 years alone, convincing myself that I did not need companionship, that the crown was enough. And then you walked into my court with your carefully neutral expressions and your brilliant mind and your stubborn refusal to be anything less than genuine, and you ruined me for anyone else." "Good," she said, echoing his earlier word. "Stay ruined. Always." They kissed as the false stars wheeled overhead, and Helena thought about the strange path that had brought her here. 10 years of hidden love, of careful distance, of building walls to protect herself from heartbreak. And then one announcement that shattered everything, that forced them both to finally acknowledge what had been growing between them all along. She had thought loving him from afar was enough. Had convinced herself that proximity without possession was better than nothing. She had been wrong. This, being in his arms with forever stretching ahead of them, was so much better than anything she had imagined. Over the following years, Helena grew into her role as queen. She established programs for human-vampire cooperation, creating frameworks that allowed for better integration between their societies. She learned ancient languages and studied vampire history, becoming one of the foremost scholars on their legal precedents. She sat beside Gorian in councils and negotiations, and earned the respect of even those who had initially opposed her through her consistent fairness and sharp intelligence. She never stopped loving him. If anything, time only deepened what she felt. She learned his moods and mannerisms more completely, discovered new facets of his personality that had been hidden beneath the formality of their early interactions. She learned that he sang when he thought he was alone, that he had a terrible weakness for chocolate despite no longer needing human food, that he worried constantly about being a good leader even after centuries of proven success. They had their first real fight 3 years in, a disagreement about territorial expansion that escalated into a shouting match in their private chambers. Helena stormed out, spent 6 hours in the library fuming, and returned to find Gorian sitting on their bed looking miserable. "I hate fighting with you," he said. "I hate it too. But I'm still right." "You're not right, you're stubborn. Those aren't mutually exclusive." They glared at each other for a moment, and then simultaneously started laughing at the absurdity of it. "We need to learn how to disagree without destroying each other," Helena said. "Agreed. We also need to acknowledge that you were mostly right about the expansion issue." "Only mostly. I stand by my position on the border placement." They worked it out, finding a compromise that satisfied them both, and they learned from it, developed better ways of communicating when they disagreed. Years turned into decades. Helena watched the human world change, technology advancing at a pace that sometimes bewildered the older vampires. She maintained contact with her mother through the end, visiting in the evenings and making sure she had the best care available. When her mother finally passed, Helena grieved for months, and Gorian held her through all of it, patient and understanding. She was proud of you," he said one night when Helena was crying in his arms. "I could see it, even in those short video calls we managed. She knew you had found something worth having. I wish she could have really known you. Wish I could have told her everything. She knew the important parts. She knew I loved you. She knew you were happy. That was enough for her." Helena hoped that was true. Time continued its relentless forward march. Helena made friends among the vampire nobility, allies who appreciated her modern perspective and willingness to challenge outdated traditions. She made enemies too, those who saw her reforms as threats to their power. She navigated it all with increasing confidence, growing into her role until no one could question her right to wear the crown. And through all of it, Gorian was beside her, her partner, her love, her equal. They ruled together, making decisions jointly, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating victories as one. 50 years after her coronation, Helena stood in their private chambers and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked exactly as she had the night Gorian turned her, unchanging and frozen. In the human world, she would have been 83. Here, she was simply eternal. Gorian appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange it is that time doesn't move for us the way it does for humans. How I've been your queen now longer than I was ever human, and yet it feels like no time has passed at all. Do you miss it? Mortality?" She considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the sunlight. I miss the way the world changed with seasons in a way I could feel in my bones. But I don't miss dying. I don't miss knowing that every moment was racing toward an ending." She turned in his arms. "I chose this. I would choose it again 1,000 times over." "Good," he said and kissed her. "Because I'm not letting you go. Not now, not ever. Possessive, always have been. I know. I love it." They made love slowly, taking their time in the way that immortals could, and afterward lay tangled together in comfortable silence. "Do you remember?" Helena said eventually. "That night in the library when I told you all the candidates were performing for you?" "Vividly. I almost told you then. Almost confessed everything. Why didn't you?" "Fear. The certainty that you couldn't possibly feel the same way. The knowledge that even if you did, it wouldn't matter because I was human, and you were eternal." "I'm glad you were wrong," Gorian said. "About me not feeling the same way, at least." "Me too. Do you remember what I said that night? About wanting someone who saw more than my crown?" "Yes, you were always that person, Helena. From the very beginning you looked at me and saw Gorian, not the Vampire King. You challenged me when I was wrong, supported me when I was right, and never once treated me like I was something other than a person. That's what I fell in love with. Not your efficiency or your intelligence, though I value those, but your humanity, the parts of you that stayed genuine even in a world that rewarded performance." She felt her eyes sting with tears that she no longer had the ability to cry. "You're going to make me love you even more? Is that possible?" "Apparently." A century passed, then another. Helena became part of the vampire world's history, the human-turned-queen who had changed the face of vampire-human relations. She was spoken of in the same breath as the great vampire rulers of old, and she took pride in that legacy while staying focused on the work still to be done. She and Gorian grew closer with each passing year, their bond deepening into something that transcended simple romance. They were partners in the truest sense, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something that would outlast empires. On their 200th anniversary, Gorian arranged a private celebration, just the two of them in the chambers where Helena had first confessed her love. He had recreated the setup exactly as it had been that night, down to the placement of furniture. "I wanted to remember," he said when she looked at him questioningly. "You're sentimental. Only for you." They spent the evening reminiscing, talking about all the years between then and now, the challenges they had faced and overcome, the moments of joy and sorrow that had shaped their rule. "I never thanked you," Helena said at one point. "For what? For seeing me, for loving me back, for giving me forever." "Helena, you gave me far more than I gave you. I was alone, going through the motions of ruling without remembering why it mattered. You reminded me what I was building for. You gave me purpose beyond duty. We saved each other then." "Yes," he agreed, "we did." As they stood together in the same room where their forever had truly begun, Helena thought about the young woman who had loved him from a distance for 10 years, certain that her feelings could never be returned. She wished she could tell that younger self that it would work out, that the impossible would become possible, that loving him would turn out to be the smartest thing she had ever done. But that younger self would find out eventually, just as Helena had. Would take the leap, make the choice, embrace the transformation, and would discover that sometimes, just sometimes, the things you want most are not as impossible as they seem. "I love you," she told Gorian, the words as true now as they had been 2 centuries ago. "I love you," he replied, as he had so many times before and would so many times again. They had forever to say it. forever to live it, forever to be exactly what they had chosen to become. And for two people who had found each other against all odds, who had turned hidden love into eternal partnership, forever was exactly long enough.